All right, we want to welcome everyone. Good morning or good afternoon, wherever you are coming in from. We want to welcome you to another Aplos webinar. We are so glad that you were able to join us today for talk a little bit more about fundraising and nonprofit leadership, management, all of that. So once again, welcome to the July Advanced webinar series through Aplos software. We're super glad that you could again join us today. My name is Dan Kimball. I'm a product specialist here at Aplos, and I have the honor to once a month present a topic or facilitate a topic, because we do have guests on some kind of nonprofit topic to help hopefully better help you do fundraising and nonprofit leadership out there. We certainly value and love the work that you're all doing, and hopefully the folks here at Aplos, we can be a part of your success and helping you out. So today we're going to talk about thanking and acknowledging donors, a topic that I've learned a lot about over the years, and I'm happy to share some of the things I've learned from some of the folks out there. As usual, if you're new to an Aplos webinar, what we do is we have a conversation about a topic, and at the very end, we'll have some time for some question and answers. Of course, at any time during the webinar, you just want to punch your question in the question box. I'll kind of be watching those. Typically, we will deal with those at the very end. But you can see here on the screen a little bit about myself. My background is in fundraising, and certainly something I love to talk about and share ideas and thoughts. And I think one of the things that I love the most is the conversation that takes place with other people in the field, and what I've learned from those folks. So with that, we'll just kind of go and dive in and get started, and let's talk about a little bit about that process of how you're thanking your donors. And again, just once again, if at any time, if you want to use the question box, and we will we'll have some time for that at the end. And then also real quick before we get going, let you know we do record all of our webinars, and then we post those on our website at the Aplos Academy. So if for some reason you missed part of it, or you want to share this with other folks that are unable to be there today, certainly we'll have that available. So we do record this, and all of the slides will be made available to you as well. Okay, so it's by way of introduction. Again, when we talk about thanking and acknowledging, we're going to be talking today more about just that tax receipt. We're going to talk about that a little bit. The difference between a tax receipt and a thank you or a proper acknowledgement. And we're going to talk about some best practices about, what are good ways to acknowledge donors and the difference between a tax receipt and a thank you. For some folks, it might be basic. It might be overview. There's some good reminders in here about that. But we also know we have a lot of nonprofits who are maybe new or, just need a little refresher on how you go about doing that acknowledging system. So as we go through there, we're going to talk a little bit about tax receipts versus thanking. We're going to talk a little bit about creating an acknowledgement process plan. What does that look like? If you've ever joined any of my other webinars, we've talked about a fundraising plan. Well, this is going to talk about what an acknowledgement plan looks like. Talk about letters and emails, and then some best practices. So we'll hopefully have some fun with there. So, and again, thank you for joining us. So, the biggest question that to kind of launch things off is that, are we talking about a tax receipt or a thank you? And so we kind of want to define that a little bit as a way to kind of get things going there a little bit. And Peter, I'll address that question here in a couple minutes. By way of kind of getting going, is that there is an actual, requirement on what is a proper tax receipt. We're going to talk about that for a minute or two. and that the IRS does have some regulations. And what we're really going to kind of separate and talk about a little bit is how we differentiate what that tax receipt is, what the donor has to get, versus how you go about nurturing and creating good thank yous at the same time as well. Hopefully you all know some of the basics about tax receipting that the IRS does require. That a donor get a receipt from your nonprofit. If it's a $250 or more, you are legally required to receipt that donor. And so this is where kind of the gray area sometimes happens because what's the legal requirement, what you do, and you don't have to receipt on. For the sake of this webinar, we're going to talk about just a real basic gift. There's a ton of resources. I'm going to give you a link, or I'm going to the IRS website at the end of this webinar. I'll show you some resources where you can go for some more detailed tax information about things like in-kind gifts and how you write off events and things like that. But for the sake of this, just kind of as a reminder, what the law requires is that a statement that the nonprofit is recognized as a tax exempt by the IRS. So if you are a 501c3, often what that means is that you'll put your tax ID at the bottom. In other words, the statement needs to show that you are, in fact, a recognized nonprofit charity. Obviously, the law requires you put the amount donated or the description if it's property, the date the donation was received, and a statement. And this one kind of comes in important that typically there needs to be a statement in there that no goods or services were received in return of this gift. Or if it was $75 or more, you have to actually outline what that service or that item was. Typically, where small nonprofits or medium-sized nonprofits, what this gets into is things like golf tournaments, special events, or dinners. You're actually required to separate the amount that was the donation against the amount or the value of the item that they received. So let's take, for example, you're having a banquet, a fundraising banquet. You're charging $125 a ticket or a person for that banquet, and you provide them a meal and maybe some wine or some other items that go with that. It's your responsibility as the nonprofit to, when you acknowledge that $125, that you provide the value received of that meal. So if it was $50, or $75, so that's a very important piece that a lot of folks forget about. And it's important that you try to separate those. Golf tournaments, things like that are the same way. So that's really the kind of really four basic things you need to, by law or by IRS standards, have to provide. Everything else then becomes on how you want to communicate. And that's really what we're going to talk about, is how do you kind of go beyond just that, that law, that boring tax statement, and so on and so forth. And so here, and so with that, we'll kind of talk about, do you have an acknowledgement process plan in place? Meaning that, from when a check is opened and deposited to your organization, what is your gift? What is the gift plan in terms of how those donors are being communicated to? And one of the things I want to, kind of highlight is that what we're not talking about here is your gift acceptance policy and procedures. Now, some of you might have a formal one of these. Some of you may have informal. Larger organizations, especially things like universities and hospitals, tend to have a very formal, what they call policy and procedures. This is things like the kinds of gifts you accept, who's responsible for the depositing, things like that. What we're really talking about is how you determine who, when, and how you will follow up with your donors. Will all donors be treated equally, or will you have a different plan for different types of donors? That's what an acknowledgement process plan that we're talking about here. And I would really encourage you to at a real minimal level, talk about or start to begin to put one of those in place. Now, whether you're a one-person shop, all volunteers, or you have a staff, I'd encourage you to start thinking about having some kind of acknowledgement process in place. And I'm going to kind of outline a couple suggestions about how to do that right now. A good rule of thumb is that a donor should be thanked in multiple ways by multiple people, as well as how their donation will be used before being asked to give another time. So if you think about that a little bit, and one of the things I really like to do when I do webinars is to encourage you as the nonprofit leader or volunteer fundraiser is to put yourself in the shoes as a donor. And imagine yourself, how do you want to be communicated to, and how do you want to know about your gift is being used? And this is where I think you can go from just kind of average to a really powerful relationship with your donors by making things a little bit more personal. So again, who's going to thank your donors? Is it you, the executive director? Is it your gift processor? Is it your staff? Are board members involved? When, and this is one we'll talk about a couple of times, but how soon after the gift is made will they receive their first thank you? How about their second one? Will they receive an update on how the gift was used at any time? And how, in addition to the tax receipt, the basics at the beginning that we talked about, that official receipt letter, will they get something additional like a handwritten note? Or a card? Will they get a phone call? And we're going to give you some suggestions along the way about how to do that. And then finally, the follow-up. These are things that should be in your acknowledgement plan. So what's your follow-up? Are you letting donors know how their gifts made a difference, how their funds were being used, what impact was that gift having on a mission or cause? So those are all things that you want to be thinking about as gifts come in. We have a question here about providing a sample acknowledgement letters. I'm actually not going to provide one in this webinar, but I will be happy to provide some for you individually after the webinar. So I'll make a note of that. I'm going to really talk about some of the language being used on that. So great question, by the way. So let me show you. This is a sample stewardship plan. This is certainly just something that, to build off of. This is only an example. Again, it's really going to look different for each organization. I don't think that there's one plan that will work for everybody. So the idea behind here is going back to what we just talked about, which was that who, when, how, and follow up. So I just went backwards on that slide for that reason. So as you can see here, this is the dollar amount. Again, every organization has to determine those dollar amounts a little bit differently. Again, keep in mind that $250 level is the only legal piece of that. In other words, you do not have to legally receipt a donation under $250. Now, whether or not you do or don't, that's going to begin an internal discussion that you need to have about how you want to be communicating to your donors. Personally, my advice is you want to be thanking folks at pretty much any level of gift. At some type. So you can see here what I put together in this plan is that different ways that those gifts come through and how they're going to be acknowledged. So for example, maybe somebody that's $100 or less, they get a thank you receipt or a thank you letter within a week. And by the way, in a couple minutes, we are going to talk about, the difference between email receipts and actual snail mail. We're going to get into that in a minute. So I know there's already been a couple questions on that. But you see here that as the different gift sizes change, the process changes a little bit. So they still get the thank you letter. So now I'm looking at the $100 to $500, and then maybe they get an additional handwritten note by an executive director or somebody, a leadership representative in your nonprofit or a board member, something like that. or a phone call. So you can see here, the one that I put together here, and this is one that I've actually used for some of the nonprofits that I've worked for, which is they get a letter, they get another letter, a handwritten letter, and then they get a phone call after that. And so that begins sort of that stewardship path that we have talked about in the past, and we will continue to talk about. And then in another 6 to 8 months, they might get a letter, an email, to kind of checking in. So the idea here is that where a lot of, unfortunately, a lot of nonprofits make a mistake is that they do a quick receipt, and then all of a sudden, a month later, donors are being asked to give again without any, kind of chance to even just to get to know the nonprofit or even learn more about how the gifts are being used. So as you can see here, the idea is you take the different gift amounts and you have a process for each one of those. And again, like I said, every nonprofit needs to kind of establish their own levels of what triggers. And then you also have to think about what kind of staffing you have. That's probably the thing I hear the most, from a lot of our Aplos customers and people that check in on our webinars are, hey, I'm a one-man shop. I can't do all of this by myself. And so, you'll have to kind of highlight the things that are important to you and then get your workload based off of that. So just kind of in final thoughts on the stewardship plan, just want to say your plan should be simple enough that you can follow it on a regular and ongoing basis, and at the same time, it's substantial enough to truly steward your donors. So again, you want to evaluate the process against the time that you have and what's really important to those donors out there. So, I'd encourage you to play around with a couple of these. This is pretty easy to create a table and then vet it through some folks in your office. Again, think about the gift from the minute it's open to the communication to the donor and what that looks like. So let's talk about emails versus letters. It's something that that each nonprofit again is going to have to decide. I really can't say as someone that's been a nonprofit for a long time if there is a better or a worse practice. I think it's really going to depend on you as a nonprofit leader and first of all, what kind of software you're using. Of course, if you're an Aplos user, you know that we have you have the ability to do very quick and cost-effective email receipting and communication to your donors. Some nonprofits use both, but you can see here I've kind of highlighted some of the the advantages and disadvantages of both. First of all, email is cost effective. You can include links quickly to social media or websites, so you can send someone a quick feedback or receipt and then send them to a website. Of course, it's easy to track. You can tell who's opened it. You can tell what's going on in the email system. Any kind of email program will allow you to do that. And it's automated. You can set up an email response to where as soon as that gift comes, it will automatically send some kind of acknowledgement or receipt. So there's excellent resources, excellent tools in the email. But the flip side is you go into direct mail. Some people say email's not as personal. Maybe it feels that you're not connecting with the donors quite as much. Whereas direct mail is more personalized. It's better suited for traditional, or some would say older audiences. Some of you that might have an older donor base, maybe they're not comfortable with email, they don't open it, whatever. Direct mail might be more memorable for donors to give again because you can actually physically write a little comment on there or handwrite a note and, make it a little more personal. But it's also a little more time intensive. So is there a better or worse? I'm not going to say yes or no, but certainly you can see the ups and the benefits and downside of both of those on that. So So again, you kind of want to look and evaluate what works for you either way. The conversation here is now that email has become sort of the dominant form of business and personal communications. A paper letter might be more noticeable and memorable, but again, you have to kind of balance the time and what does your shop look like. I'm still a big believer in sort of a combination of both. You're finding those donors that do give. In other words, if you have people that are willing to give a reoccurring gift is, of course, they're saying, hey, you can, I'm going to give you $50 a month or $100 a month until I tell you differently. Well, obviously, if they're willing to sign up for that kind of program, then they're open to an email receipt. However, you might have, let's say you've identified some people in your nonprofit, or you see this in churches a lot too. So if we have some church leaders out there, I know that a lot of our churches are in this camp as well. People are giving online. You're finally giving online. You know what? From time to time, it's still okay to send some of those people a letter as well. So kind of mix it up. Put the two together and see if you can find a medium ground with both. So kind of the bottom line here is when deciding whether to if you want to do what we call snail mail or an email, think about your donors and who they are. And this is really where we get into you as the nonprofit or the church or the faith base is really understanding your donor base. Who are they? Are they older? Are they more traditional? What do they prefer? And that might even be a conversation you have. If you're using software, you can actually ask donors what do they prefer, what kind of communication they prefer, and you can set up groups based off of that. So, so the idea here is that, everybody's going to say, oh, you can do this easy and you can do this more efficiently. But at the end of the day, it's really about you understanding your donor base. So that's kind of my thoughts on emails versus letters. Again, my personal feeling is that if you are doing automatic email receipts for monthly donors, from time to time, I would encourage you to still, every few months or so, send a card, do a phone call, maybe send a letter to a group of folks who are loyal email or online donors. And then the same with your direct mail folks. It might be a conversation where you say, hey, we'd love to, help get you set up on a monthly donation, that kind of thing. Okay. So for really the next kind of few minutes or part of this webinar, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about some of the best practices of thanking your donors. Again, some of these, might be, familiar to you. And if you're doing these, great. Maybe there might be some ideas here, but these are some best practices that I have either personally found or some of the folks that I really respect in the nonprofit field. And I'm going to give you some resources at the end, some folks that I like to check in with or follow. There's a lot of great resources on the idea here. And we're going to begin to kind of use the word stewardship because stewardship and thanking your donors really kind of comes in the same field. I know there might be a couple of you who joined me. I did a webinar about a year or so ago on stewardship, but we're really kind of talking about the same thing, is that as soon as you get interest in your nonprofit or your church, those become donors or prospects. You want to begin to steward not only the gift, but steward those donors themselves. First thing, you want to think quickly and personally as possible. This kind of comes with sometimes great debate in the nonprofit world in terms of what's the turnaround time. What everyone will agree on. I very few people would disagree that sending the acknowledgement within a short amount of time really is important, and it reassures the donor that donation was received, and really kind of is that first way to solidify that relationship with that donor. It does a couple of things. One, it tells the donors, hey, you're a legit organization. You actually do open the mail, you deposit checks, you take donations seriously, because it's their money that they're concerned about. There's nothing for me personally that's a little more annoying is for me to send a check to a nonprofit and for it to not maybe get deposited for a month or something like that. And that has happened, and it's one thing if it's like your kid's school or PTA or something, but for a 501c3 that's doing work in the community, you really should be turning those things around pretty quickly. I would say that your larger shops that have full-time staff, they usually have a 48-hour to a 72-hour turnaround time. I spent the last 10 years of my nonprofit life working at a university, and I know that the 48-hour rule was in play there. Smaller shops, I think within a week is completely fine and acceptable. But again, that might be a discussion that you want to have as a staff. Maybe your board, if you have a development committee of your board. Again, this should not be a board decision. It should be an internal conversation amongst those who are doing the work. Okay. So really one of the best practice I think you do is doing a quick and personal as possible. Again, when you're doing email receipts, automated receipts, you lose the personal side. So I think there's ways around that. Another best practice I think is really important is that that you're recording those gifts accurately, so so making sure those donations are going to the right place. So if you are sending thank you or acknowledgement letters, and you're saying, dear Mr. Smith, we thank you so much for that $25 and you're specifying the fund that it's going into. Make sure that you're recording those right, because again, that data is going to become important. You don't want to get a phone call from a donor that says, well, wait a minute, it says here in my letter that it went to the general fund where in effect I gave to a scholarship. Or if they give to a specific fund like a scholarship or a project, you want to make sure you mention that because I think that just shows them that you're really caring for the details in that gift. Along the same lines, really make sure that you have good data. If you are using a database such as Aplos or any other kind of database, the proof is in the pudding in terms of how are the names and addresses correct? Are the contact names right? Are you doing Mr. and Mrs.? Is the gift coming from a couple, from an individual? And the idea here is that you're really going through and putting your eye on the details. So if you're going to run a batch of letters, if you do your thank you letters in a batch, you do a mail merge, you have 15 or 20 letters, before you seal those up and sign them, make sure that you have somebody who can just put their eyes on them and just kind of make sure that it's clean and it's correct. Some people are a little less concerned, but my experience has been is that understanding who people are, they want to know that you know who they are. My wife's name is Suzanne. And a lot of people call her Sue, and we get letters to Dan and Sue, and that really drives her nuts because there's no Sue, her name isn't Susan, and so for us as donors, that's something that we want to know that the nonprofits have taken the time to understand who we are as donors. So to spend a little time on that and making sure your data is good. And if you're not using a database of some kind, I'd really encourage you to look into that because that's really going to be a way to help save you time and automate and get some of that right versus an Excel spreadsheet or something that might merge incorrectly. And again, personalize as much as possible. Can't emphasize this enough. The base of your thank you letters can stay the same. You don't have to recreate or reinvent the wheel, as they say, every time. But you want to write maybe a few personalized paragraphs that can be swapped in and out for different donors. And so I think that's completely okay. You don't have to, be this, incredible writer where every month you're spending hours on letters. But, one suggestion I have seen that I really like, which is, you maybe have a template for 4 or 5 different groups of donors. You've got your first-time donors, you've got your repeat donors, you have your major donors, maybe you have your board members, and other volunteers. And these are all distinct groups. And certainly if I'm giving every month and I get a letter that kind of just makes it look like, yeah, it's just a first-time donor, I'm a first-time donor, or vice versa, that might kind of bother me, or, something like that. So, take advantage of again, the technology out there, and putting into practice some of those, ideas there. Okay. So next thing is utilize your board members and your leadership and other staff to help. So again, depending on the size of your shop, and what we mean by this, we talked about this in your plan, but board members can sign letters. Board members can make phone calls. Sometimes donors want to hear from other people. They want to hear from people in the community. So if you have board members who are leaders in your community, maybe get them involved. Certainly, if you're an organization that has, say, a development staff, an executive director, or a president of or a CEO, it's nice for donors to get some kind of feedback from that person, from that CEO. So again, depending on the size of the gift, the timing of the gift, you want to have different people signing those letters. So again, that's a conversation that you can have as a staff, and again, it's really good to get feedback from some of your donors themselves. You might even consider going out and meeting with a couple of your top donors and ask them what works, not just for your own nonprofit, but ask them for some of the other organizations give, what are things that they respond to in terms of how they like to be thanked and acknowledged. Can you overthank a donor? I would say no, but certainly I've dealt with organizations where donors will call and say, you know what, don't waste a stamp on me every month. I'm good for it. You don't need to send me a thank you every month. So we put a little note in their record, and that's helpful for me to know. So these are things that you can do, I think, by always offering feedback and getting feedback with your donors, and letting them kind of help guide you a little bit. This next one I love, which is, test your own processes. One way to do it is make a gift yourself, from home. Make a gift either to your own organization. Actually, I like to give small gifts to other organizations just to sort of find out, how they treat my gift. You can do it through the internet or through the mail, and just ask yourself some of these questions. Do the automated email responses look like the way you want them to? In other words, sometimes when you're on the nonprofit leadership side of things, you forget from a donor what that might look like. And so, how fast are the letters getting out? How much does someone need to give before you add personal notes to the letters? These are some other questions right here, right in front of you. Do first-time donors get different letters than repeat donors? So not only are you testing your own organization, you might learn from other organization as well. On that. So, and Peter, I see your question, and we'll do that during the Q&A. Change the language of your letters. And so this is actually, we've had already a couple. We've had a couple of questions about this, and for this webinar, I did not add actual sample letters, but if it is of interest to you, if this is an area where you'd like to see a couple of sample acknowledgement letters, I'm happy to provide those for you. So if you would just either in the question box let me know that you are interested in that, or I'm going to actually give you my email at the end, and you can email me personally, and I can certainly walk that through here. But sort of the I would say one of the biggest trends in fundraising right now is the idea. This has been going on for about 4 or 5 years now, which is becoming more donor centric in your language, what the idea here is you talk less about yourself and more about the donors. So changing the language means, and I'll just kind of give you an example. Most people will say, hey, thank you for your gift. Because of your $50, we are able to, provide 15 meals, or something like that. The idea of changing the language, being more donor-centric, is you're making the donor the star, meaning that, hey, dear Mr. and Mrs. Smith, today we have the privilege of watching 3 children come through our program and receive services, and it was so amazing to watch, their eyes light up. And all of that took place because of people like you who care so much to make a gift. So it's something like that. Of course, that was a little choppy because I actually just did that on the fly. But you see the idea there is you're starting to stop talking so much about you and more about the donors. As a donor, the donor wants to feel like that whatever that gift amount is, that they really are making a difference. And that's, especially if you're producing regular letters to people, whether they're monthly, quarterly, 4 or 5 times a year. I think if you're changing the language, you're telling the donors that you care enough about them, that you're taking the time to keep them updated. And so there's a lot of things you can do with this. There's a lot of resources on, if you just Google donor-centered fundraising. I've also provided a couple resources at the end of the webinar as well. Jesse, are you completely out of sound again? I got a note here that, Jesse, you've lost sound. Okay, I'm going to keep rolling here. Is anybody else having problems with sound? Oh, just on my end. Yeah, I think it's just on your end, Jesse. I apologize. I think everyone else is doing okay. Could someone just put in the question that they can hear me okay still? Yeah, Jesse, I think it's, unfortunately, Jesse, it's just on your end. So just kind of go from there. Oh, okay, audio's working. So Jesse, I'm sorry, we'll have to get back to you on that. So I apologize. All right, so making donors a star, sorry. And one thing that's kind of talked about is making your online thank you needs to stand out. And so this is, again, going back to if you are using email. Thank you guys for letting me know on the sound. I appreciate that. Yeah, thanks. So one thing I've been kind of learning a lot about, there's a great nonprofit called charitywater.org, and one of the things they do a really great job with is their online thank yous and how they use their subject lines. There's some great resources out there about if you are doing automated replies and or email receipts or email thank yous, start to mix up the subject lines a little bit more. In other words, use subject lines that kind of what we call jump off the screen, really kind of grab your attention. This is a great way to get people to not only read it, but also maybe for them to kind of feel like they're a little bit more involved in the fundraising of that organization. Something like, hey, we hit our goal if you were doing a campaign, or you changed a life today, or I'm sure that some of you can come up with some more creative kinds of things. But the idea is that mix up those subject lines to try to get people to use them. One of the downsides for me right now about email is that email gets very noisy. I don't know if you're like me, but I typically in the morning, I can open up my email and have 25, 30 emails from, not only just personal ones, but like different subscriptions that I'm on, or when I purchase something online, I suddenly get on their email list. So you want to try to get your emails to stand out so people are taking the time to read those updates. Okay. And then share results often. And what this really is beyond that, thank you for that $25, that $100, let people know what's going on. Let people know how dollars are making a difference or how you as an organization are hitting your goals. And it doesn't matter if you are, feeding the hungry, you're tutoring kids after school, or if you are, if you're doing ministry in downtown, wherever you are, let folks know what's happening within your nonprofit or your faith-based organization. I can't emphasize this enough on that. So again, what I will do, I know I got some notes here from a bunch of you. I'll probably send out after this webinar, we will notify you of when the recording is going to be available. And what I'll do is I'll send you guys either a link and or an email with a couple sample letters of acknowledgments that I like as well. Okay. So just again, along the conversation, just kind of ask yourself the question, are you stewarding the gift or the donor? And you're really kind of doing both. For many, many years, stewardship was really just about the gift. In other words, making sure that it got deposited, it was being used properly, there was accountability, gifts were in the right fund, they weren't being crossed over. But I really think donor stewardship is growing into a combination of both stewardship and donor relations. And so when we're talking about thanking and we're talking about acknowledging, what we're really talking about is gift stewardship. That your responsibility as a nonprofit is to really steward both the gift and the donor there. Okay. And so let's just kind of do some highlights of that. What really stewardship is recognizing giving at various levels. So that, you have a kind of a different plan, for that. Communicating to donors through various mediums. In this day and age, the ways in which you can reach out to donors is obviously changed a lot with social media. There's a ton of opportunities and really what you're doing is you're thanking them. Even though you're communicating them, you can also be thanking them, because what you're doing is you're kind of getting them involved in the journey, or in the process. Donor newsletters, holiday cards and congratulation cards and email updates and impact stories, donor honor rolls, social media, snail mail. These are all different ways in which you can be talking with your donors. And to a certain, degree or extent, these are ways in which you are also thanking them. And acknowledging them. You're acknowledging them of their presence. So, you can do maybe an email saying, hey, we want to welcome, if the donors are comfortable, the following folks. We want to thank the following people for being involved in our organization, and those kinds of things. And along with that, stewardship also can include invitations to various events. Again, I can't emphasize stories of impact enough. There's just great resources out there about how to better tell your story, and let people know that their commitments really is making a difference. You don't want to overdo the emails, especially newsletters. At the same time, I think you want to highlight some great things that are going on in your organization. As well. Provide annual impact report. Some people call this kind of an annual report. One of the ways you can do that, didn't talk about it very much on the front end, but I believe that hopefully all of you are doing year-end contribution statements at some level. One of the things you can do is kind of include in that letter. One is either links to a place where people can go to learn more about some things that took place during the year, or actually in the letter itself, in that actual contribution statement, year-end contribution, you could actually highlight 4 or 5 things that took place, and then also in that let them know the information that they need. So that is a great opportunity to communicate to donors in those year-end, what we call contribution statement. So combining the two into a report. I've seen ones now where I get my end of the year contribution statement from an organization, and they give me a link to a website, and the website is specific to, hey, here's some great things that took place this past year. And then again, I've talked about this in the past, but just would encourage you to start to develop some specific stewardship plans for some of your larger donors. So people that are giving at different levels, you want to figure out different ways to communicate with them, thank them, acknowledge them, so on and so forth. Okay, so just kind of want to wrap up on some final thoughts. Hopefully, there's some takeaways there for you. If you're feeling good about your thank yous, I think there's always opportunity and ways you can be changing them up. I like to know that the nonprofits are always thinking a little differently and changing some of those up. But I see this a lot where the thinking is that a lot of donors, they begin to feel like they're ATM machines. And what I think donors really want is they really want to focus on them as people. So think about what those donors do for your organization, that they don't just give money. They save lives, they feed the hungry, they house the homeless, they educate children. They're volunteers in your communities, they're volunteers in your churches. They all those different things they do. And when you start treating them more than just a donor, I think they'll have real incentive to continue to come back more. And give more to your organization. And so really the end of the day, the whole point and the dynamic in those, in thanking and acknowledging correctly, one, you have a legal responsibility to the IRS, but then after that, then you begin to get into that personalized, really helping people, feel valued in that. Most people are giving to 2 or 3 or 4 different organizations. It's rare that you have just one solo organization. And so there is a lot of competition out there. And so, other than, people that maybe are given to their church, your role becomes really important to kind of keep those folks engaged and knowing that they are making a difference. So I provided some resources here. Again, this webinar will be available as a recording, so you can come back to those. But these are just some ones that I would recommend, especially in the area of acknowledging and thank yous. The IRS charitable organization site, there's a lot of stuff here to chew on if you need some information about some of the different types of thank yous for different kinds of gifts, property and things like that. That's a place to go. And then some folks down here in the fundraising field that I personally have a lot of respect for, and I follow on Twitter and interact with as well. So there's some resource for you. So with that, we're going to do some Q&A. And I know that Peter, you had a couple of questions, and I will dive right into those here as we go. Also just want to mention that if you are yourself not using any kind of donor software, we can help you out here at Aplos. We do accounting and donor management, and so we can help you along with that as well. So, Peter, the IRS allows the board to use donated funds to meet the mission of the charity.org, which may differ the donor's wishes. Should this possibility be stated in the acknowledgement letter? Okay, I want to make sure I understand your question. IRS allows the board to use donated funds to meet the mission. So Peter, is your question around then the board, how the board uses money? I want to make sure I understand that. So, Peter, if you could re-ask that question, and then I'm going to go through. Curtis, I see you are interested in a letter. I'll go back. Okay. We mainly share results using newsletters, social postings frequently to let people know, but are you suggesting we should send individual letters, emails to donors separately to share results, or is having them on a donor newsletter enough? Jay, thank you. Good question. So I do think that the newsletter is a great medium. If you are already sending donors individual letters to thank them, what my suggestion is from time to time, you might want to in there incorporate a little impact sentence or an impact story is what my suggestion is. But if you feel like you've got a good response or open rate or people responding to your newsletter, certainly keep doing it that way. My thought is that if you're taking the time to send an email or a letter to folks thanking them for the gift, you might as well pop in a sentence or two about some impact. Okay. Please send a copy of the resources list. Yes, I will do that. You will get a copy of that. Again, just so you know, what we'll do is about 24 hours after this webinar, you will all get an email where you can access a recording and access the slides. You should thank donors before making another ask. What is the minimum time we should wait before making a subsequent ask after making a gift, assuming we've thanked them before? Yeah, I read. So the question is, how long should you wait to ask a donor again? I mean, I would say 3 months minimum, unless you have a relationship. In other words, unless you've gone out and met with that donor and you've had significant conversation and you know that they're engaged and they're ready. The only other difference might be is like maybe you have a couple campaigns that are kind of on top of each other. But I personally think you should wait at least a couple, 2 to 3 months before you go back asking again. Because again, if for first-time donors, for regular donors, you treat them a little differently as well. But I even think regular donors, want to be thanked a little differently too. Okay. Board may direct the donated funds to different projects than the donor designated for. Yeah. Okay. So, Peter, I think that I think your initial question is, yeah, absolutely. I think you should let folks know where their gifts are going for. If a donor is donating to a designated fund and their gift's not getting there, that's an issue between the donor and the nonprofit. So if, for example, if the board is directing funds to a different place that the donor desires, then I think a conversation needs to take place there. I mean, you as a donor should know where your monies are going. Okay. Please send a letter sample and resources to the CBAP. Okay, great. Thank you. Would you recommend sending out videos of events where donor contributions were impactful, such as back to school event? Yes, absolutely. I think videos are great, a great resource. What's really cool is you can do really short thank you videos. I wouldn't do long ones. Or entire events or things like that, but certainly, even something as simple as a couple of people just saying, hey, we want to thank so-and-so and sending those out. So yeah, I would absolutely use the technologies out there. You can do a quick video on your phone with smartphones now and things like that. So yeah, I'm a big believer. I think one of the things that we're in this kind of amazing time right now as fundraisers and as nonprofits, in that there are so many different what we call channels or avenues. If you've spent any time on any of my webinars, or if you've been in the fundraising field for a while, you know that they used to talk a lot about the donor pyramid. And that donor pyramid kind of doesn't exist the same way anymore. It's really kind of a funnel. And in that funnel is all these different ways in which people are not only coming to your organization, but the many choices people have to give. I mean, you can text a gift on your phone. You can do a GoFundMe page. You can go on Facebook. You can send in a check in the mail. I mean, all those different, things. Now with the Square technology, I mean, I go to fundraising events and they're ready to take my donation right there on my credit card on a Square. Or I even went to an event the other night where I was able to donate to the cause using my phone at the table. That happened, and I was, so the idea is, you utilize that. Don't get overwhelmed, but try to use the resources that are out there. Peter, you're very welcome. I hope I clarified that as well. If there are any other questions, now would be the time to ask those. Again, we want to thank you guys for joining in today. I think I got all the questions. If anybody felt like I missed your question, go ahead and either re-ask it or or again. So let me give you my email, which is dan.kimball. It's dan.kimball at aplos.com, dan.kimball@aplos.com. If there is a question that I missed or you want some more information, certainly send me an individual email. We will send out a recording of this and as well as links in that recording. You'll get the resources here that we talked about earlier in that. So again, any other questions? Good. Well, thank you, everybody. I want to wish you a very productive summer. Hopefully there's some vacation time for you. I do want to say in closing that we've got a great guest. You'll be getting information on our August webinar. We have Jay Jowdy, who is an amazing fundraising consultant for the Lighthouse Council out of Tennessee. He's going to be our guest in August, and I'm super excited to have him. I just talked to him this morning to confirm the date and the content, and we're going to be talking about some annual giving topics and better ways to raise money for your nonprofits. So please join us for that. Where can I find your other websites? Yeah, we have. If you go to aplos.com, we have a section called the Aplos Academy, and if you go to Academy, we have recordings of all of our webinars and other resources as well, short articles and things like that. So that was where you go. And then if you want information about Aplos, that's also where you go. So again, thank you all for joining us. Happy fundraising, and we hope you have a great day. Thanks.